Hello everyone, a very warm welcome to all of you in today's live teaching learning session. I am Riya Pramanik. So I am teaching you BPSC 131 Introduction to Political Theory. Today we will be looking at Unit 6, that is Rights, and Unit 7, Democracy. In my previous part of my lecture, I have taught you about liberty, equality, and justice. Today we will move forward, and in unit rights we will be looking about meaning of rights, rights versus privileges, theories of rights, and human rights. In unit 7 democracy, we will be talking about meaning of democracy, advantages of democracy, direct versus representative democracy, types of democracy, and Indian democracy. So let's move forward. Unit 6. In this unit, we will be talking about rights, various kinds of rights, various theories of rights. So let's move forward with the meaning of rights. Rights are called social claims. It helps individuals to attain their best selves. That means to develop someone to attain the best selves, to develop to the best, a person needs rights in a society. It helps them develop their personalities. So for a person to grow, to develop their him or her personality, rights are very much needed and rights are very much important. So in a democratic government, rights can best serve the people if it maintains a system of rights of its people. So for a democratic country, it is very necessary and very important to make people or available rights to the citizens, to the people of the particular state. So rights are very important, and it is one of the major or important part of a democratic government. So we can further say that a state never gives right, they only recognize them. So now comes to that governments never grant rights, they only protect them. So we can say that in a state, when a government is ruling people on behalf of people, in that case the government never grant rights to its citizen, they only protect them. They protect the rights of the citizens, and in case uh, someone is not allowing someone to do something according to rights, at that point of time government can intervene and save those rights. Rights are essential conditions of human personality. Without rights, a person can't develop fully. It is very necessary for a person to have rights so that it can develop its personality and it will help him grow further. So, different state systems recognize different rights. So, it is based on the state, how a state is working, or what nature of a state is. It will give different kind of rights. So, rights incorporated in the constitution of the land are called fundamental rights. So, as an Indian citizen, we know that we have fundamental rights. We have 6 fundamental rights. So, whenever rights are incorporated in the constitution of a land, at that point of time we call those rights as fundamental rights. Why it is fundamental? Because it is very necessary for a person to have those rights. Addition to that, fundamental in the sense that they are, suppose if someone is not given right to equality, at that case we can move to court, we can say that please grant me these rights because it is my fundamental right, so I am entitled to it. So we know that in Indian constitution we have 6 fundamental rights. Earlier it was 7, but right to property was abolished. Next, come to that right to life is a basic right without which all other rights are meaningless. So the first and foremost, the most important right of a person is right to life. So without that, without right to life, no other rights will be fruitful, because for a person life is everything. So right to life is considered to be one of the fundamental rights. Now let's move forward to rights and privileges. There are difference between rights and privileges. We often consider privileges as rights, but there is many difference. There is a huge difference between them. And with this part, I will be telling you about the differences between rights and privileges. So let's start with rights. Rights are our claims on others as our others claim on us. So rights are claims on others and our claim also. Whereas privileges are granted to some and denied to others. So we can see that privileges are not for all. Privileges are granted to some people and denied to others. But rights are claims on others as are others' claims on us. So it is one of the major or one of the important difference between rights and privileges. Next point is that rights are universal as it is assured to all. So in this point, we can see that rights are universal in the sense it is for everyone. Each and every person of the society have been given rights irrespective of its caste, culture, ethnicity, birthplace, race, gender. That's why rights are universal, because it is assured to all the citizens of a country. Whereas privileges are not universal as they are possessed by few. So privileges are only given to few, handful of people. They are not given to everyone. So there is a discrimination in giving privileges, whereas rights are universal and privileges are not. So the third point, the third difference between rights and privileges are that rights are given to all without discrimination. As I told you, rights are given to all without discrimination, because in a country, in a state, there are many kinds of people belonging to different region, geographical locations, caste, class, creed, color, race, gender. But rights are given to all without any kind of these discriminations. Whereas privileges are given to some, the selected few. So we can see here the difference between rights and privileges. Rights are given to all without discrimination, whereas privileges are not like that. Privileges are for some people. Next is rights are obtained as a matter of right, whereas privileges as a matter of patronage. So for privileges, there is a link of patronage. Someone is giving you privileges, okay? But whereas rights are universal, non-discriminatory, and it is given to all. Rights emanate in democratic society. One of the foremost and one of the most necessary and essential part of a democratic government is that their citizens should be given rights. So, in a democratic society, rights are very, very essential, and it is one of the main feature of a democratic government and democratic state. Whereas privileges are features of undemocratic systems. So we can see that for a democracy to run fruitfully and to run properly, citizens should be given rights. Otherwise, we can say that a democratic society is undemocratic if people are not given rights. So, now we will be going towards theories of rights. In theories of rights, we will be learning about 5 theories. For example, the first one will be the theory of natural rights. Second is theory of legal rights. Third is historical theory of rights. Fourth is social welfare theory of rights. And the last one is the Marxist theory of rights. So, now I will be discussing about these theories of rights one by one. So let's come to the first theory of rights, that is theory of natural rights. So natural rights are advocated by Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau, J.J. Rousseau. So who are the advocates of natural rights? It is Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, and J.J. Rousseau. They all are they gave a state, they talked about state of nature where natural rights are possessed by men. So, to understand this point, that it is in the second point which is written, natural rights are possessed by men in the state of nature. In this part, we should know what is state of nature. To understand state of nature, let's talk about this and see what these social contract theorists have told about state of nature is it is a hypothetical time period or hypothetical era where societies didn't exist. So it was the time when there were no societies, people were living on their own, and there were no kind of group or society. And before societies came into existence, they called it as state of nature. So, three of social contract theorists, Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, and J.J. Rousseau, talked about state of nature, which is a hypothetical time period, hypothetical, you can say an era where people were having natural rights since then. So they tell us about that even before societies were created, people were given natural rights. So according to them, rights are inalienable, imprescriptible, and indefeasible. So they talks about that whether in a society rights are given or not, people inherit rights naturally. So they are inalienable, imprescriptible, and indefeasible. Nobody could take them. But this theory of natural rights, as we talked about, have many critiques, have many criticisms. So the first is that the critiques argue that there can never be rights before the emergence of society. So few people say that the critiques of theory of natural rights talks about that how can people have rights even before the creation of a society. So they critique this point that without a society rights can't be given. Right presupposes the existence of some authority to protect them. So what are critics saying about it is that for rights there should be some kind of authority which will be protecting them, because otherwise rights will be meaningless for these critics who are critiquing theory of natural rights. So rights presupposes the existence of some authority to protect them, and on this point, on this ground, they critique the social contract theorists Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, and J.J. Rousseau, who talks about natural rights. So let's move forward to the another theory of rights, that is theory of legal rights. So theory of legal rights is that talks about rights are granted by the state. In my first part of lecture, I have told you about state and what are the components of state. So state why it is necessary. So in this part, we can see that how state is performing or state is granting its citizens rights. So the theory of legal rights say that rights are granted by the state. So, who are the advocates of legal rights? It is Lasky, Bentham, Hegel, and Austin. All these thinkers, all these political scientists and theorists talks about legal rights. State lays down a legal framework which guarantees rights, and it is the state which enforces the enjoyment of rights. So, the supporter of legal rights says that there should be some kind of legal framework, and it is the state who will lay down these kinds of legal framework which will guarantee rights to all its citizens. Okay, so it is the state which enforces the enjoyment of rights. There should be some kind of authority, some kind of legal framework to rights so that it can be provided to each and every citizen of the state. So law creates and sustains rights. So when the content of law changes, the substances of rights also changes. So the theorists of legal rights say that law creates and sustains rights, and as a result of which, if the content of law changes, the substance of rights also changes. So it is upon law. So let's move forward to Lasky's theory of legal right. We have learned that Lasky is one of the supporter and one of the advocate of legal rights. So let's see what Lasky says about legal rights. For Lasky, legal rights are social conditions given to the individual as a member of society. So, being a member of a society, an individual is given these rights and they help promote individual personality, his best self. So, what he mean about best self? It is that those social conditions without no man can seek to be his best self. So, what he define about best self is that it is those social conditions without no man can seek to be his best self. So, for a person to become his best self, he needs some kind of rights. Further, Lasky says that they are social because they are never against social welfare. For Lasky, he says that these rights are never against any social welfare. Further, Lasky says that state only recognizes and protects rights by maintaining them. So, what Lasky says is that it is the state who recognizes and protects. So it is the only duty of state is that to recognize those rights and to protect those rights and maintaining them in the society. Also, he says that rights are never absolute. So for Lasky, rights are never absolute. Rights are dynamic in nature and contents change according to place, time and condition. Suppose few years back, 50 years back, somebody is given some kind of rights, but nowadays if it's not going well and not going according to the constitution and the society, those rights will be taken off. So these rights will be abolished and will be withdrawn. So Lasky says that it is dynamic in nature and the content change according to the place, time and conditions. So rights go along with duties. Duties are prior to rights. What Lasky says about rights is that for rights, there must be some kind of duties which a citizen is bound to do. So rights go along with duties and duties are prior to rights. For example, if we take example of Indian constitution, in that we can see that we have fundamental rights. Along with fundamental rights, we also have fundamental duties. So for like that, duties and rights go along with each other and duties are prior to rights. Lasky's argument is that without counting economic rights, an individual cannot enjoy his political rights. So, for Lasky, economic right is essential. Otherwise, no individual will enjoy his political rights. So, for a person to enjoy political rights, it is very much necessary to provide him or her with economic rights. Lasky's theories have also critiques. They say that critique says that if we admit that rights are states' creation, then they can also take it away. So, what critics say that if we talk about or if we believe that rights are states' creation, then the state will have that much power, that much authority to take that right away from citizens. So, it is very uh, complicated because if we believe or if we allow states or if we see that it is state who is giving us right, so with that we also believes or we also make sure that state can also take these rights away from us. So this there is a fear of losing rights. Now next come to historical theory of rights. So the historical theory of rights are also called the prescriptive theory. So we can also say that prescriptive theory and historical theory are both same. Rights grow from traditions and customs. So what historical theory of rights talks about? It is those rights which grows from traditions and customs of a place. This theory has its origins in the 18th century in the writings of Edmund Burke. So, who advocates about these historical rights? It is Edmund Burke. According to Burke, people have a right over anything that they exercise or enjoy uninterruptedly over a fairly long passage of time. So, what does Edmund Burke talks about? He says that it is right is all those things that people are enjoying uninterruptedly over a fairly long passage of time. So, every right is based on the force of long observation. What is going on since ancient times or since past many years will be considered as rights as per Edmund Burke. But his theory of historical rights is also critiqued because all customs cannot be resulted in rights. For example, the sati system, the sati pratha system of Indian land, where ladies or the women or the married women after her husband's death are live burnt. They were burnt alive on the funeral pyre of their husband. So these kinds of customs should never be resulted in rights. So critiques argues about that. Now, let's move forward to social welfare theory of rights. The social welfare theorists of rights talks about that rights are the conditions of social welfare. State should recognize only such rights which help promote social welfare. So, the theorist of social welfare rights, they talk that it is the duty of the states to recognize only such rights which help promote social welfare. Rights are the creation of the society in as much as they are based on the consideration of common welfare. So, these theorists or the advocates of social welfare theory of rights, they say that it is rights are the creation of a society. Okay, so there should be consideration of common welfare for all, common for everyone. So they have also critiqued. The critics say that it dwells on the factor of social welfare, a term too vague to be precise. What do you mean by social welfare? Critics argue that the answer will be very vague because you can't define social welfare precisely. So, what comes under social welfare is very problematic, and critics argue that this is why social welfare theory is not appropriate. Let's come to the Marxist theory of right. Marxist theory of rights is understood in terms of the economic system. As I told you very briefly about historical materialism in part 1 of my lecture, in that the Marxist theory of right is understood in terms of the economic system. So it talks about economy, means and production. So Marxist theory of right states that state being an instrument in the hands of economically dominant class, and it will protect the system of rights favoring them. So what Marxist theory of rights say that the state, if states is providing us rights, it will be in the hands of the economically dominant class, for example, the capitalist. So in that case, if state is dominated by capitalist class and economically dominant class, at that point of time we can say that they will protect only those rights which will favoring them, which will benefiting them. So Marxists say that states are a instrument in the hands of dominant class. Here he is saying about the capitalist class. So according to Marx, class which controls the economic structure of society also controls the power which it uses to protect and promote its own interest. So what Marx is saying? Marx says that the class which controls the society or the economic structure of the society controls all the power which they use for their own benefit, for their own selfish interest. So This is all about Marx's theory of rights. So, apart from these theory of rights, we also have human rights, which is very important to understand. So, according to S. Ramphal, human rights were not born of men, but they were born with them. So, the what S. Ramphal said about human rights, that it is something which is not born of men, but they were born with them. So, human rights are inherent to our nature and without which we cannot live as human beings. So, human rights are very important to understand, and it is one of the main part for a human, because being human, we should have some kinds of rights which will protect us from all wrong things. So, human rights permeates the entire UN Charter. So, the United Nations Charter talks about human rights, and United Nations General Assembly approved this Human Rights Declaration on December 10, 1948, and after that, the day came to be declared as the Human Rights Day. So, since 1948, we celebrate Human Rights Day on December 10. Why? Because on this day, the United Nations General Assembly approved this Declaration of Human Rights. So, what do we mean by human rights? What are human rights? So, these rights include right to life, liberty, to security, freedom from arbitrary arrest, to a fair trial, to equal protection of law, freedom of movement, to seek asylum, etc. So, human rights talk about these things, and every individual have these human rights as per United Nations, irrespective of his geographical location. So, with this, we read about rights, theory of rights, and all. Now we will be moving forward to our unit 7, that is democracy. So, democracy is very important to understand, as we all know that we, the citizen of India, are living in a democratic country. So, for us also and for entire world, we should know what does democracy mean, why it is necessary, and why major countries, most of the countries, adopted this democratic system of government. So, let's move towards the meaning of democracy. Democracy is believed to be originated in Athens. Athens is a Greek city, states in the 5th century BC. So, if we trace the origin of democracy, we can see that it could be found in Athens, which is a Greek city states, in the 5th century BC. The word democracy is derived from the Greek word demokratia. So, the term which we use in today's time, democracy, it is originated or it is derived from a Greek word, that is demokratia, and it is a combination of two Greek words, that is demos and kratos. So, according to like for demos, if we wanted to know what does these two words mean, so demos means people, whereas kratos means power. So we can say that democracy stands for the rule by the people and the government, which is based on the consent of the rule. So if we talk about democracy, we can see that it is different from monarchy, because in monarchy, the power is inherited. Okay, so dynasty, there are many dynasties in which there were people who were inheriting that power to rule people. But here in democracy, we can say that it is the rule by the people. The citizen of the particular land is forming and ruling. So, the government which is based on the consent of the ruled. In a monarchy, the consent, there is no consent taken from the citizen or the people, the subjects, we can say. In monarchy, we talk about subjects. So, there is no consent taken from those subjects. But in a democratic government, in a democratic state, the government is based on the consent of the people. So, let's move forward toward the advantages of democracy. As we can see, as we talked about the meaning of democracy, we can see that uh, how to take consent from people. So, it is through voting. So earlier it was be done on ballot paper, but nowadays with growing technology, it is nowadays taken through EVM, electronic voting machines. So through votes, we provide our consent to a government, to a group of people, the political parties, to rule on us. So let's move forward to advantages of democracy. So these advantages are given by J.S. Mill, John Stuart Mill. So the first advantage he's talking about is that democracy compels the decision makers to take into account public interest and opinion, which would not be the case in an authoritarian or aristocratic form of government. So the major thing which comes under democracy is that democracy takes the it talks about, or it take into account, the public interest during decision making procedures. So it is people who rule, and on the behalf of people, the citizens of that particular state, the decision makers take people's interest and their opinion to form any kind of law and policy, which is not a feature of an authoritarian and aristocratic form of government. As we can see, in an authoritarian aristocratic form of government, the leader, the ruler, takes decision on his own without consenting the public. So democracy is different from that. So according to J.S. Mill, this will be the first advantage of having democracy in a country. The next is democracy brings in multiple views in the process of decision making, which allows decision makers to pick up the best idea. So, in a democracy, because people are given a chance to say their views or to talk about their opinions, so it allows the decision makers to pick up the best idea from them. Why? Because they because of so many people, the ideas will be different. So among all those ideas, decision makers pick up the best idea, and this advantage is not available in an authoritarian and aristocratic form of government. Also, the third advantage which J.S. Mill talks about is that it helps in character building of citizen, as it inculcates qualities like rationality, autonomy, and independent thinking. So, whenever a person is given freedom to think, to say his own views, to provide and to talk about his opinions, at that point of time, it builds a person's character, it develops him, it gives him courage. So all these things are the advantages of democracy. Now, to understand democracy, we should understand two kinds of democracy, that is direct versus representative democracy. So what does we mean by direct? In this slide, we will be talking about that. So direct democracy based on direct and unmediated citizen participation in government rule. So in direct democracy, the citizens of a state or a area, state or a country, they participate directly in government rule. In direct democracy, all adult citizens take part in decision making. So, after a point of time, after a particular age, the adult citizens take part in decision making directly. Direct democracy wipes out the distinction between government and the governed, and the state and civil society. So, direct democracy provides a area or provides a time period where it is felt by the citizens that there is no difference between the people who are governing us and the people who are being governed. So it is very important. So direct democracy ensures greater legitimacy, as people are more likely to follow decisions which are taken by them only. So direct democracy are legitimate in the sense, more legitimate in the sense that people used to follow those decisions, which decisions are taken by them only. So it provides a greater legitimacy to the government. Ancient Greek city-state model was an example of direct democracy. So in ancient Greece, there were many Greek city-states, as we talked about in part 1 of my lecture, where we said about that Aristotle were talking about city-states, and he described those city-states. So at that point of time, during that period, we can say that direct democracy existed in Greek city-states. Nowadays, it can be found in Swiss cantons. So it is not like that it was a history and nobody is following direct democracy nowadays, but Swiss cantons participating in direct democracy. So practicing direct democracy is difficult in big modern nation states because the number of the population increased over time. It is very difficult to have direct democracy in a large geographical area because it is not viable to have voting like that. Now move forward to representative democracy, which is opposite to direct democracy. In representative democracy, it is limited and indirect form of democracy. As we know, representative democracy, we don't vote directly, we do it indirectly. It is indirect as people do not exercise power directly but through their elected representative. So, we do not exercise our powers directly, but through representative whom we chose through voting. So, on behalf of us, it is our chosen representative who will be representing us forward. So, we can say that there are two types of representative democracy, like presidential and parliamentary democracies. These are two main types of representative democracies found across the world. So, parliamentary democracies are more representative than the presidential, but at the same time, they are relatively less stable. So, to understand parliamentary and presidential democracies, let me tell you a few points on that. In parliamentary democracy, there is no distinction between, there is no clear cut distinction between executive and legislature. The leaders, the executives are part of both legislature and executive. Whereas in a presidential form of government, the executive is not part of legislature and legislature is not part of executive. There is separate, both the organs of the government are separate. They don't work together. They work separately. They are independent in their own sphere. Whereas the next point comes is that in a parliamentary form of government and parliamentary democracy, the head of the government is known as prime minister, whereas in a presidential form of government, the head of the government is known as president. So these are some basic descriptions and basic distinctions between parliamentary and presidential form of government. Now, we will be talking about different types of democracy. The first one is classical democracy. So with the name classical, we can say that it is something which is belonging to a very long time back. So classical democracy is based on the polis or the city-state of ancient Greeks. So the kind of democracy we were talking about, which was found in Greek city-states, is called classical democracy. In this model, citizens were politically very active. As we already discussed about Greek city-states and democracy over there, we can say that at that point of time, citizens were very politically active. Citizens also contributed to decision making and public offices. So, citizens were actively participating in decision making procedures and on public offices. But one thing which we should understand about classical democracy is that at that point of time in ancient Greece, the classical democracy was only for landed men. Okay, so it excluded women, slaves, and foreigners from citizenship. So, who were the participants of classical democracy? Only aristocratic landed noble men. So, all the others categories like women, slaves, they were not allowed to participate in the political procedures. So, if we can see that they are excluded and their exclusion from citizenship was very unfortunate and undemocratic as well, because as we know that democracy is for all, is for everyone irrespective of their gender, caste, creed, or their economic background. But the classical democracy were excluded, it was excluded for certain categories of people like women, slaves, and foreigners. Okay, let's move forward to elitist democracy. As we can see with the name elitist democracy, this theory was propounded by Vilfredo Pareto, G. Mosca, Robert Michels, and Joseph Schumpeter. So these were the thinkers who propounded these elitist theory of democracy. So, according to Robert Michels, he gave a theory, or he gave an idea about iron law of oligarchy, which means that every organization is ultimately reduced to oligarchy, amounting to rule of a few. So, whatever procedure you apply to have a proper democracy, but according to Robert Michel, all these organizations will be ultimately controlled by a very few people, the and it will turn into an oligarchy and not a proper democracy. Most of the power, prestige, and wealth are in hands of the ruling class, irrespective of the form of government. So they argues that whatever form of government you have in a state, ultimately the person who will be having power, prestige, and wealth, ultimately they will be ruling the government, irrespective of the form of government. So, elitist theory talks about the economic background and power and prestige, which ensures about the government. The ruled follow the elite as they do not have leadership qualities. So, if we say that, why will people follow these kinds of rules where only elitist people are ruling? So, according to these theorists, they say that the ruled, the governed, follow the elite as they do not have leadership qualities. Because normal people, the normal citizen of a country or a state, because they are lacking leadership qualities, that is why they follow the elites. So, this theory poses a serious question for democracy. As we can see, because democracy is not like that, democracy is for everyone. So, elitist theory talks about that. Let's move forward to pluralist democracy. What does we mean with the pluralist democracy? It is believed that pluralists believe that policy making is a decentralized process where different groups bargain for their views to be accepted. So here we can see that different groups participates and they bargain for their views to be accepted by the government. It is result of interaction between different groups, unlike few elites. So there is a difference between pluralist democracy and elitist democracy. In pluralist democracy, it is said that it is resulted of interaction between different groups, unlike few elites. So it goes against the elitist theory. So, public policy is formulated by more organized and vocal groups. So, basically, the pluralist democracy talks about groups, their activities, and they say that it is the groups which bargain with the government or the policy makers so that their point of view, their opinions should be accepted. So, the pluralist theory's main proponents are Karl Mannheim, Raymond Aron, Robert Dahl, and Charles Lindbergh. So, these four thinkers are proponents of pluralist democracy. So, next move forward to participatory democracy. All the democracies are participatory in the sense that they are based on popular consent, which ensures their participatory nature. So we can see that all democracies are participatory because people used to participate in voting and then democratic procedures. In contrast to elitist and pluralist theories, participatory democracy advocates active citizen participation in policy making to ensure common good is promoted. So, participatory democracy is against, or it talks different from elitist and pluralist theories, because in participatory democracy, it is believed that the people, the citizen of the particular state, will be very actively participating in policy making, in decision making, and it will promote common good. So it talks about that. So, participatory democracy also makes the government more accountable towards the citizen. Why? Because it is the citizens who are participating in that, and because people are very active, they are aware about every things in happening in the society. At that point of time, it makes the government more accountable and transparent in their workings. So, who are the proponents of this participatory democracy? It is J.J. Rousseau, J.S. Mill, and C.B. Macpherson, who supported this idea of participatory democracy. So, next come deliberative democracy. What does deliberative democracy mean? It argues that political decisions should be based on fair and reasonable deliberations among citizens. So, according to deliberative democracy, the decision making should be based on some kind of deliberations among citizens, which will be fair and reasonable. So, deliberative, as the name suggests, it talks about deliberations. So, this is required to produce best decision to achieve public good. So, with deliberations happening, we will be provided with the best decisions so that we can attain the best or achieve the best public good. So, deliberations in decision making, in policy framing should be very much necessary. So, who advocates deliberative democracy? It is John Rawls and Jürgen Habermas who argues for a deliberative democracy. Let's move forward to people's democracy. People's democracy refers to democratic models generated by the Marxist tradition. So, people democracies talks about, or it is a part of Marxist tradition. Marxists theorists talk about people's democracy. So, what is people democracy? People democracy is established after the proletarian revolution, when the proletariat starts making political decisions. As we talked about in Marxism, that it talks about two classes in a capitalist society. One is capitalist, who is the landed man who have all the means of production, and the other part is the proletariats, the workers, the laborers, who are dependent upon those capitalists for their daily earnings. So, according to Marxist tradition, whenever proletariat will revolt against the capitalist and the capitalist situations and capitalist society, at that point of time, when proletariats there will be a revolution, and when proletariat starts making political decision, that will be called as people's democracy. Why? Because according to Marx, the real class or the people who are suffering should make their decision. Otherwise, if the capitalist class or the class which have all the powers and prestige and money power, if they make something, they will be doing that on basis of their own selfish interest. So, for a democracy to be called as a people's democracy, it is very much necessary that it is done by, or the political decisions are taken by the proletariat, the working class, the workers class. Okay. So, according to Marxist tradition, whenever the proletariats will start taking decisions, political decisions, it will eventually give way to communism, marked by self-regulation. So, the ultimate aim of Marxist tradition is to achieve communism. As we talked about that in part 1 of my lecture, where I told you about the historical materialism, how history is divided by Marx according to the notion of materialism, and the ultimate goal of a Marxist tradition is to achieve communism in the society. So, with this, with the political decision making powers with proletariat, Marxist tradition say that there will be communism. Next, move forward to social democracy. Social democracy stands for a basic change in Marxist thought, although it shares same goals with communism. So it is little different from Marxist traditions or people's democracy, but it shares same ideologies and same views. Why? Because social democracy stands for a basic change in Marxist thought, although it shares same goal with communism. So social democracy also want a society to be a communist society. So what are the aims of social democracy? It is to establish a socialist society, but not through revolution, but through state regulations of means of production. So we saw that in people's democracy, there is it is told that there should be some kind of revolution done by the proletariats, but here social democracy disagree with it, and they said that the changes in the society should be based on state regulations of means of production and not by revolution. So this is the difference between socialist democracy and people's democracy. So social democrats see democracy as essential for achieving the socialist ideals. So this is about social democracy. Let's move forward to e-democracy. It is a very new concept based on the works done by earlier theorists. So whatever is done by earlier theorists, e-democracy is quite new, very new I must say, and it is about electronic democracy. The E in e-democracy stands for electronic democracy, which it is the use of information and technology to enhance or even replace representative democracy. So the aim of e-democracy is to replace representative democracy through information and technology, which is growing day by day in the entire world. So IT sector is quite emerging as one of the main sectors, and it will ensure, it talks about that democracy can also be ensured through electronic platforms or through IT technologies. So, supporters of e-democracy have built on the ideas of participatory democracy to enhance active citizen participation in policy making. So, they argue, the supporters of e-democracy argues that through e-democracy, the citizens' participation will enhance many times, and they will be participating actively in policy making. So this is all about e-democracy. E-democracy means electronic democracy. So the last part of my today's lecture is about Indian democracy. As we all know that India is referred to as the largest democracy in the world with more than 800 million eligible voters. So we should know that because of the population and because of 800 million eligible voters, approx, this is not the proper fact because day by day it is changing. It is very dynamic. So approx 800 million eligible voters, we can say that India is one of the largest democracy in the world. The other reason of calling India as the largest democracy is also that since the inception of India as a country, India as a state, in 1947, after the independence from the British colonizers, since the day one, India is democratic, and it is today also, it is a democracy. So we, as a citizen of India, are very lucky because we continue that democratic tradition even after so many problems we faced after the partition. So at that point of time, India was a very poor country. There were very less literacy rate, and there were very harsh economic conditions which we faced after the partition of India and after British left us on our own. So at that point of time, keeping a democracy alive was the toughest task for a country like us, which was very poor, and where there were so many diversities, there were riots going on. At that point of time, it was the huge task for the constitution makers and the leaders of India to keep India a democratic state. So, since inception, India adopted parliamentary form of democracy, keeping in view India's past experience with the system. So, we inherited parliamentary form of government, which we can see that it was a part of British political system, and because we were colonized by them for more than 200 years, and because we were accustomed with that part, so we inherited parliamentary form of government and not presidential form of government. So after independence, periodic elections based on adult franchise have ensured that democratic institutions and practices are firmly rooted in Indian politics. So we can say that since independence, there were always periodic elections that happened in India, and from the day one, all the citizens, irrespective of caste, creed, gender, and their geographical locations and ethnicity, were given universal adult franchisee, which means uh, a right to vote and right to participate in political procedures without having any kind of discrimination. And every citizen who is above a particular age, that is 18 in India, all the adults were considered to be a valid part of, they can participate in political process. So we, since inceptions, were given universal adult franchise, and we should also know that in many countries these adult franchise came a very late, that in many European countries gave rights to all the citizens very late. But we are lucky that in Indian, the Indian leaders at that point of time ensured that each and every person, irrespective of his economic and educational background and all other discrimination and diversity, will be given equal rights. So, the democratic institutions and practices are firmly rooted in Indian politics. So, we are very lucky and we are very fortunate that we could sustain democracy since a very long time till today because of strong decisions taken by leaders at that point of time, and because of the past experience we faced during British colonization, that we ensured that these kind of democracy should never turn into a autocratic or authoritarian rule and military rule. As we can see that many countries emerged at that point of time, during that particular time, became a victim of military rule in their country, but India could sustain democracy since day one. So with this, I conclude today's lecture on two units, that is Unit 6, Rights, and Unit 7, Democracy. So, in the next part of my lecture, I will be talking about gender, that is Unit 8, and Unit 9, Citizenship. So, since this was the part 3 of my lecture, today we have read about rights and democracy. And I should say that in a democracy, rights are very much important and it plays a very essential role. And it is a very important topic in this paper, that is BPSC 131, Introduction to Political Theory. So, to move forward, in next part of my lecture, I will be talking about gender and citizenship. To briefly tell you about this, gender is very important topic in this subject. Why? Because we should understand what is gender. Okay, we often tell about people that male and female is gender, but in next part I will be telling you how it is different. So, we will be talking about gender in detail, various theories of gender, how there are different point of views regarding gender. And in Unit 9, I will be talking about citizenship, how a person is given citizenship by birth or by naturalization. So, these topics will be taught in next part of my lecture. So, today what we have read about rights and democracy, different theories of rights, different point of views of rights, who consider it to be democracy, which is supposed to be based on ancient Greek city states. So with time we can see that there are many changes occurred in the society, and with that new ideologies, new point of views emerged with time, and this is the reason that we can see so many varieties of democracies and so many theories of rights. So with this, I end my lecture today. We will be looking about gender and citizenship. So thank you.